Hello and welcome. India's manufacturing industry is facing a lot of stress for various reasons. What is the way out? Well, is innovation one of the answers? Now, what is innovation? Well, joining me to answer that interesting question is Professor Srikanth Srinivas from Dallas, Texas, and he's going to tell me what does innovation mean. Professor, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Hi, Govind. Thank you.
Tell us, you're an innovation catalyst. What does this term mean in today's context?
Innovation is relative to the competition. So in other words, what can you do to run faster than the competition? And how does that running faster than the competition translate to size for you? Is it converting to market share? Is it converting to profitability? Things like that. So it's like a two-dimensional angle to innovation. And what is key is to consider that as a core competence. Like Peter Drucker, for example, said, every organization has a competence that depends on what they do, but they all share one core competence, which is innovation. And typically, companies think of innovation as product innovation or R&D or things like that, but what we need is innovation as a core competence.
Right. So, can you give us an example now? I mean, you've studied many organizations, you've studied many, and I think pretty much across the spectrum. I was reading this example that you've quoted of Shanta, this young lady in a village called Kodapattinam in Tamil Nadu, who also uses innovation in her own way. So tell us about how this works from small to large examples.
Excellent question. So traditionally, people have thought of innovation in a corporate context, and what we found is that there is a common mindset that applies whether you're a filmmaker or a sports owner or even somebody who gets microcredit loans. So even though money is given away, few escape the poverty cycle, and that's what attracted our attention in Shanta's case as to how did she take that small microcredit loan and completely transform her life. And we found 5 key things that all these successful people have done to apply the innovation mindset. First of all, they found opportunity where others found problems. They said there must be a way out. And that drive to say there must be a way out took them to the next step, which is what we call as and thinking, which is that there is always a balance. In Shanta's case, the balance was I need to get out of poverty and I need to get my kids out of poverty. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing we found in our study is that and thinking was not at all common, in the sense that even in her microcredit situation, there were people who said, I will get out of poverty at my kids' expense, which is where all this child exploitation comes, or I will try my best to get my kids out of poverty, and in that sense, they sacrificed everything and got nowhere themselves. So design thinking is a very important thing, and it applies equally to companies because there is a very strong or thinking, which is I can either do well this quarter or I can do well in the future. And what we found is the best of them have design thinking saying I'm going to do well this quarter and I'm going to stay relevant for the future. That was a very strong part of the research and thinking. And it doesn't stop there in the sense that these two are only thinking different, and you need to combine that with resourcefulness, which is acting different. So the main thing we found between the innovation mindset, like Ashanta and others, is they expected hurdles and they challenged those hurdles and they overcame those hurdles, whereas the others gave up rather easily. And that is true even in the company setting, where the resourcefulness in the highly energetic, innovative companies is very high, and a climate is created for innovativeness, for resourcefulness, and for people to know that there will be obstacles and you need to overcome them. As an example, Art Fry, the person who was behind this post-it notes, the number of obstacles he had to overcome and the amount of patience that 3M showed in bringing that product to life is extraordinary. And today it's like $1 billion product, but along the way, it took 2 to 3 years of Art Fry, who's showing resourcefulness, and 3M, which is showing a culture, a climate of saying, hey, Art, go for it. I know there will be obstacles, but I know you will succeed. And I think that twin thing on the resourcefulness is very key.
Right. So, if you were to look at the Indian example, Professor Srinivas, what would you say either ails Indian companies, if it does, and what could be the way out of the problems or the challenges that they're facing?
So I would say, I think the dominant thinking when it comes to innovation is product centric. First, we need to get to customer centric. And second, the whole idea of the reach of the market should be broadened to a global scale. And India has examples. So in fact, one of the case studies that I was going to talk about was the ECG machine that GE made.
Right.
It was conceived in India, but it's now in 97 countries. And there are IT companies that they created the global delivery model in India, and now it's in so many different countries. And I think we need that same kind of mindset and attack for the manufacturing sector to be able to say, how do I get customer centric? How do I go global? How do I maximize my reach? And I think that is the key to getting the manufacturing sector revived.
Right. So, and yet what you're saying is something that many companies or most companies are intrinsically familiar with, and yet they have not been able to do it. Why do you think this happens? Is it because we saw a boom phase where there was a very high economic growth and that distracted companies from focusing on the customer the way you defined it?
No, actually, the truth is that our organizations are designed for performance. If you think about it, a hierarchy, a team structure, clear goals, objectives, things like that, quarterly performance, all of that are designed for today's performance. And we can't deviate from that. The key is in people thinking an R and saying, hey, I've got to do this, and people who have tried innovation have disturbed that performance engine, and as a result has created more chaos. So the key to it is first and foremost to say do no harm to the performance engine. And how do I keep the innovation engine going? I think that is the key element that is missing. And it's not just Indian companies. Every company in the world has the same problem, in the sense that the focus, the dominant logic is the performance engine. People got to that scale because they were innovative at some point in time, but they've lost it. And now, every time they try, the pendulum swings either too far towards innovation or too far towards performance. So what we need to do is to bring that balance. And it is a delicate balance. It's not easy to do, but it's well worth doing.
Right, and I think as you're saying, Professor, the balance is something that you should be achieving in good times when your performance is good, and in bad times when performance is not good, right?
Exactly, yeah. So 3M again is another excellent example where throughout, even these 2008 crisis, for example, they maintained a 6 to 7% return on percentage of investment in their R&D, and their financial figures, if you take it as a 3 to 5 year average, are just extraordinary for a manufacturing company. Gross margins above 50%, return on assets always exceeding 20%. And for a company that's 100 plus years old, more than 30% of the revenue comes from products introduced in the last 5 years.
Right.
These are measures that every manufacturing company should strive for and exceed.
Right.
And I think it's very, very possible for every Indian company to do it. And the interesting thing with India is that there are many large companies with the scale that they can bring to the rest of the world. And I think if you look at a consumer base, even though there are many industrialized nations, there are many in all of these countries, in addition to the emerging economies, that have the same constraints that Indian companies have already solved. So I think if we can take that and take that reach, it will help in spurring the innovation, not only within the Indian context, but it will help the entire globe.
Professor Srinivas, last question. I think you've also argued somewhere that R&D does not necessarily equal innovation. Can you throw some light on that?
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing where there is a department called R&D, and they do a lot of things, but not all of that gets into the real world. That is one part of the problem. And the second is there's a lot of innovation happening in other departments which are really innovation. So if you look at it, you can divide the work you're doing into three spaces. A current space where the business model is defined, an adjacent space where you're tweaking the business model a little bit, and a new space where you're radically changing the business model. So innovation, people typically think is only that radical disruptive innovation. That is wrong. and people think that R&D is product innovation in the new space, which is also wrong. And people think that the current space is somehow not included in the innovation. I would argue that all of them are innovation, and I would in fact say that 70% of your innovation budget, time, resources should be in the current space, because if you're not competitive today, you can't stay for the future. But at the same time, at least 15 to 20% should be in the adjacent space, and another 5 to 15% should be in the new space. And that total pool of doing things different is what I would call as innovation as against R&D. And R&D as a department, it was relevant at one point in time. It is continuing to be relevant, but it's not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient. Just like a lot of things have got democratized, innovation also has to get democratized. And in fact, Bali Technologies, another example, with a big Indian presence as well, they did a crowdsourcing where they posed a few questions on using some technology where any employee could answer those questions, and those ideas got converted to opportunities, and many of them resulted in awards afterwards. So separate R&D and innovation is very important.
Right, Professor, thank you very much for speaking with us and sharing some of your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.